Hello, everyone, and welcome to this breakout session. I'm Theresa Anderson, and I'm coming to you from Sydney, Australia, where I'm a social informaticist and data AI ethicist. And before we begin this session this morning, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. In my case, I'm sitting on the land of the Guringai people of the Eora Nation here in Australia. But I'd also, because we are a global conversation, like to extend my respects to any First Nations people who are listening to this session or who will be listening to the recording. And with that, I want to turn over the floor to Rys Farthing, who's going to share with us some of the work that she has done related to a great passion she has at giving voice to young people in the conversations that we've been discussing in this webinar today. Rys, the floor is yours.
Brilliant, thank you. And thank you for that introduction. My name is Rys. I work at an organisation called Reset Tech Australia, and I'm speaking to you today unusually from LA, where I'm on the lands of the Tomba people, having just left the Gadigal lands, also of the Eora Nation in Sydney, which is my homeland, over the weekend. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes-ish about geolocation, data and young people, before handing over to a real expert for a couple of minutes and then open up for questions, answers, discussions. Does that sound good? Sound about right? Yep, thumbs up, excellent. Do feel free to jump in as I'm going as well, turn your microphone on. We can just chat and see how we're going. I want to start with some super obvious stuff that might help explain why we're talking about geolocation and data and young people. Because I'm aware that some people might not have thought about this from this lens before. But look, as the previous speakers all outlined in far more detail than I ever could, but geolocation technology produces a range of data, and it's a very particular sort of personal data that has a very particular sensitivity to it. It's about data about where we are and where we've been. And I'm not going to sort of single it out and say that it's the most sensitive of data or anything, because I'm aware that personal data of all varieties creates privacy concerns, whether they're small concerns, large concerns, inevitable concerns, paranoid concerns. Personal data really is an instrument that creates risks around our privacy and sense of self. And while these risks, well, many of them are new and novel in this sort of era of big data and surveillance, but there's also something I think that we've known for a very long time as human beings, as a society, about the risks of geolocation data. It's the tracking of our physical selves that not only reveals our personality, so our preferences, our desires, our vulnerabilities, but also our corporeal selves to these risks. So, what I think is slightly different about geolocation data when we're talking about it is it has this sort of ability to expose, if you'll, forgive the use of language, expose our souls as well as our bodies at the same time. And there's something very human, something very innate to us about worrying about this. Yet when it comes to how we treat this data, how we protect it, these really innate, these very rational human concerns that we have just so often get overlooked. And geolocation data is just treated as if it's any other form of data. And what's worrying, particularly for me, is that too often children and young people's geolocation data is treated as if it's adults' data. It's treated as if it's some sort of commodity that can be collected and used to either, build a better product to sell children sell children like niftier product, or a great way to sort of market to them. And this for me raises two questions. Firstly, I think there's a really legitimate question that we have to ask about the ability of our children to grow up free of commercial exploitation, or specifically in rights language, as we put it, their right to freedom of thought, their right to an inner sanctum that's not manipulated by commercial forces. And as a society, we have long since recognised that children are actually entitled to some forms of protection from the worst affronts of advertising. Most countries, including Australia, where I'm from, and almost every country in the OECD, has some form of code of conduct or regulation limiting how we market to children. Whether this is limits on what can be marketed to children, i.e. you can't market alcohol and knives, or whether it's limits to how we can market to children, you know, like there's restrictions on what is otherwise really common marketing techniques, like making claims about quality, like this is the best, or this will change your life. You can't say that in children's marketing. There's a general understanding in the marketing world that you really dial down the impact when you're trying to market to children. And there's a lot of research to suggest that this is necessary. So below the age of 8, a lot of cognitive psychologists suspect or have shown that children can't really understand the difference between advertising and information. Between the ages of 18 to 13, there's a lot of research that suggests it's a struggle to tell the difference sometimes. And then at ages of 13, and I might add for all of us too beyond, it can be really hard to assess the validity of the claims and associations made in marketing. So it goes without saying that any targeted advertising that uses young people's geolocation data to deliver up an even more compelling commercial product, or even a more compelling outright ad, violates this widespread norm, where even advertisers, I just want to repeat this, even advertisers are aware that they have an ethical obligation to dial down the persuasion of ads for kids. We've got tech companies accessing and using geolocation to really knock it out the park in terms of persuasion. And secondly, the second concern around this is that this collection and use of data that can create real risks for children that are far more amplified than they are for adults. Let's look at Snapchat, for example. When you're using Snapchat, which all over 13-year-olds are able to do, according to their terms and conditions, Snapchat collects a range of geolocation data about you. They collect, I'm reading from their terms and conditions here, information about your precise location methods using GPS, wireless networks, cell towers, Wi-Fi access points, and other sensors such as gyroscopes, accelerometers, and compasses. So suffice to say, they know where you are. And this is used by Snapchat for many things, you know, to refine their product, to sell targeted advertising, and also to make their product more personalized and appealing. And this includes snap maps. Now, I'm not sure if anyone's seen snap maps or you don't know about snap maps. Basically, what snap maps does is it uses geolocation tagging that people put on their photos or videos to pull together maps of photos and videos from an area. Now, I'm just going to share my screen for 2 seconds to show you what this means for children and young people. Here we go, share. Can people see this? It should be just 2 images side by side. Okay, brilliant. This is something that I was able to do with Snap Maps last month as I was preparing for this talk. Now, what I did at work on a work phone, we're all police checked. I did it with a colleague, so we're monitored, safeguarding first. We went into Snap Maps and we went to look at our local high school. And what you can see here is this here is our high school campus. And this little cyan figure, this little heat map, is actually a part of Snap Maps that shows you that there's a lot of videos and pictures there, that this is a hotspot of Snapchat activity. And by clicking through on that hotspot, you're allowed to go and look at what some of these videos are. Now, this hotspot is the gates to my local girls' high school. And we were able to go through and have a look at images from inside the school. And we took an image here just so you could see this, really non-identifying one, of a Bunsen burner. We were able to go into a science class and join these young people and see what they saw, see loads of images about them, and see the stories that they were making. Now, if no one would think it was a safe idea to let a random stranger walk into a school and have a look around, why would Snapchat facilitate this? So what do we have? We've got the way that children and young people's geolocation are being used. None of it makes sense. It's being collected and used in ways that violates the long-held tradition that we have of affording young people more protections. This is absurd. And it's an absurdity understood by young people. At Reset Australia, we recently worked with a polling company to do a survey of 16 to 17-year-olds to work out what they thought about the way the data was being collected and used. And geolocation data turned up as one of the strongest concerns that young people hold. 71% of respondents felt that they were tracked too freely, and 83% said that they actually wanted stronger rules around turning off geolocation data when it wasn't necessary. Now, I'm not sure if anyone's tried to get a diverse group of older teenagers to agree on rules before, but that's pretty compelling stuff. more than 8 out of 10 teenagers actually want better rules protecting the collection and use of their data. And this is possible. In the UK and Ireland, they've either passed or just drafted data protection regulations which require exactly that, for geolocation to be turned off for young people, except where it's absolutely essential for a service like a map app that tells you where you're going. Now, there's global campaigns for similar regulations from the US to Australia. We're all pushing for regulatory moves in the same direction. I can connect anyone to these campaigns if they're interested. But fundamentally, I think it's absurd that in 2021, we have to campaign for this. We have to campaign for the rights and protections that we've long since afforded children to be respected again in the age of big tech. Now, I think it's absurd, but I wanted to invite a real expert to talk about this. I'd like to invite AJ so we can restart recording. There we go. AJ, over to you now.
Okay, so I've got geolocation on my phone, my iPad, my laptop and my tile, and a lot of things track me, and my mother does too. I know why my mum tracks me, but I don't to know where I am, but it doesn't tell me when, which isn't nice, so I track her back. Some of these apps like maps and stuff use it from a location and how far I've travelled and how far I have to go. Snapchat wants to track me to use the date and time and make stickers and stuff and send me personalised stuff and let me snap maps. This means they send me personal, special things based on where I am. I know some other apps track me because they want to know stuff about me, send me things and steal my data. This could be used to scare me, steal all my money and kidnap me, maybe. But the money thing's kind of true. I don't always feel safe with this much information being known, and I didn't really think about geolocation much before this. It's just something that's in all my devices. It's just there. It's some bits I like about it. I like that I have independence because my mum can track where I am. That's a 10 out of 10. But people misuse the information. That's a negative 1 out of 10. And feeling unsafe. So much information being known. That's a negative 5 out of 10. But I think there should be less geolocation in general. But in terms of specifics, what I think should happen is that there should be more controls over who has access to my geolocation. Parents should be able to see that too and be able to turn it on and off. I want to know when apps are tracking me. I want to know when my mum is too. I don't know how I feel about geolocation overall, but I do think there should be more controls over it.
Thank you very much, AJ. I think you've said it better than I ever could. And I want to open up the floor, if I can, for questions either to myself or AJ, I guess.